Hello and welcome to another Tuesday at 2. We have chosen to rebrand our podcast as It's Better Together. And I do want to say on behalf of my sister, Alison, Nissen, and I, it truly is better together. Each week we get a chance to celebrate another woman in business. And through her work and her inspiration at this time together, we'll get a chance to learn a lot more about her, how she does what she does. And then as well, just in general, just sharing great ideas. And today I'm very excited to have Dana Look-Arimoto with us. She's the author of Stop Settling, Settle Smart, and the host of the Settle Smarter podcast, which I'm really excited about this because it's really looking at a different way of that, kind of age-old work-life balance. So there's lots for us to talk about. With that, Dana, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you both.
Well, we'd love to first start with give us a little insight to your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I spent 25 years in staffing. So hiring, training, mentoring, developing, and unfortunately, sometimes firing literally thousands of people over a career. I helped many founders grow and sell their businesses. I thought I wanted to be a CEO when I grew up, and then I was and decided to go out on my own 5 years ago. So I've been an executive coach for the last 5 years. As you said, I'm now an author, a podcaster, and recently I took the crazy journey to launch my own radio show.
That is awesome. Well, there's so much for us to unpack here. And before we continue, may I ask, where are you located right now?
You may, Marcy. I am on the island of Kauai.
That's amazing. So you moved there. That's where you're permanently based?
Yes, very recently I was sharing with Alison on our pre-show that this was a recent move and really a whole lifestyle change.
I cannot imagine the difference. And I think that's brilliant. And, the way we do our lives, especially as entrepreneurs, I mean, it's a gift to have this type of technology. Not that I always say that technology is a gift. Sometimes we like to not accept it as our gift, but to have that flexibility and that freedom to do this. So I'm really amazed how you did that. And can you just share a little bit more like that moment when you're like, maybe I could relocate and move to Hawaii? Can you share a little bit of that story?
Yes, and this becomes the original practical actionable advice I'd give myself if I knew more than what I know now, maybe 5-10 years ago, which is try it before you buy it. So I went on a workcation, as clients and friends were calling it in 2019, to this very island. And I spent a month on the island testing out whether or not this is something that would work for me. Now, this is pre-COVID. If we can remember that far back, it's very difficult. And I was really working and living and vacationing, and I had family coming and going. I even had a couple days to myself. No kids, no dogs, no husband, no friend who's like a mom who I now live with, Ohana style. I was trying it on. And what I learned a lot at that point was that, yes, it's possible. Technology is part of it. The way we give back to ourselves was a massive insight for me about when I work and how I work and the hours I keep, especially working across the country in different time zones. So it was really challenging.
So your background says harmony beats balance every time. And that's what I'm hearing from you. So you took this opportunity to visit Hawaii and stay there for a month to see if it would be a balance. So tell me about harmony beats balance.
Yeah. So the problem with balance is that most of us are sold this line of goods that if we just do it all, we can have it all at one time by being our all. Spirit hands. So it's not true. In fact, it's a recipe for burnout. And most of us, especially women, tend to run in that hamster wheel really, really hard, like a sprint inside of a marathon. So for me, it was taking a step back, slowing it down, really going deep into what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, how I'm doing it across 5 key facets of life: career, family, friends, community, and our own well-being, and not trying to ace the test on all 5 of those at one time.
All right, I'm laughing out loud because that's exactly what we do, particularly women who want to achieve. We try to be perfect in all areas. And if we fall down in one, we just want to punish ourselves because we're just not quite enough.
Yeah. And what I like to say, even in my book, is practice makes permanent. It never makes perfect. The challenge that I was facing was that I was in Silicon Valley for 22 years. And so I thought the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world were where it's at. Like that was the role model. That was my muse. That's who I was supposed to be. And in fact, I found it completely draining and impossible. And I got sick all the time. And I'd roll out of that hamster wheel panting. That's a pretty image. And then I'd get right back in just to start running it again. And I think what happened for me was I didn't realize at the time, so many young up and comers were trying to emulate me, both men and women. And I was not setting a good example. So, shocker, people were burning out working for me.
So this is fascinating. If you were to kind of give yourself advice, like kind of who you are today, look back to Dana, I don't know whether that was 8 years ago or how long ago that was. Can you kind of talk through how you'd kind of give her advice?
Yeah, sometimes yesterday, because again, I'm still practicing, work in progress, Inside Out. That's a great movie, by the way. Okay, so if I told myself in sort of life in trimesters in my 20s that I would actually be able to be more successful by slowing it down, I would have not listened. I just wouldn't have. I was too smart for my own good. And I was such a high achiever, I didn't realize something was wrong. In my 30s, when I started to have children, it became very apparent that something had to give. I just didn't know what the options were. I didn't know that this was a lifestyle that might work. In my 40s, I started to wake up. And what I would tell myself then that I know now is that you can actually create more joy, more value for yourself and others and productivity if you don't trade off the joy. Don't trade the joy.
Oh, I'm such a firm believer in that. So when you're in that moment of stress, so right now, I do feel like there's more people working hard to find the joy and appreciate the joy, but there's enough stress in the environment and the unknown that people are just like a half step away from it, that they just can't kind of feel the joy versus searching for the joy. You know, when you have somebody that you're working with that's in that kind of that hamster wheel of, I'm trying to find the joy, I'm trying to prioritize it, but they just don't know how to get there. Are there any tools that you use?
Yes, and it might be overused, but it's micro habits. And in fact, I taught a class for a bunch of women in technology in one of the big companies that we all know about micro joy habits. And so it might be as small as, for me, petting my dogs in the morning before I even let my feet hit the floor. For other women, it's putting that yoga front and center before they start their day. For other women, it's actually walking outside and breathing the air, and it might be less than 5 minutes. And if you say to someone that never puts joy into their day, put in an hour every day, they're going to look at you like you have 3 heads. So you start really, really small, really, really incremental, and then you get hooked on the joy, and that's how to do it.
So is this part of your stop settling method?
It is. That's a really good question. And it's interesting that when I say the word methodology, a lot of people tune out. Method is the sister to methodology. Let's face it, it's just a shorter word for the same concept. And what I mean by that is if you don't have a process, it's very unlikely you will keep up with it. And in addition to that, you start to need someone, or at least, your own best conscious, if you're able to hold you accountable. So I teach accountability partnerships for micro joy habits. It might be someone in your home. It might be a coworker that you're not as close with. It could be a coach. It could be someone that you are inspired by. And if you're really, really conscious, it might be your own self to hold yourself accountable, but you got to have a method for this madness.
Alison and I, when we were kind of, I'd say I was college, she was right out of college. We used to kind of get together. We'd have so much fun on like a vacation or reunion or something. And we talk about different ideas we wanted, but we'd always kind of come back to like, we need to be accountability partners. Like we'd even like make up little journals and we'd write in advance in the pages ahead, little accountability things of, things that we could do that would kind of make us appreciative or happy or something like that. So I love that idea of accountability partners. And do you know what also is great about your method is it's not that you're not trying to making any habits so hard to do and so long to do that they don't have time to do it. So those micro little joy habits, that's a great technique.
And women will report to you that if they realize there's permission to have joy, they'll start to accept it and they'll start to explore it. We don't accept it, that it's okay for us to provide value and be valued and be hyper productive. We're women, we're very productive. We can multitask. It's just the way our brains work. And yet the joy factor is usually what's traded off. It's amazing to me that that's somehow how I'm hired, not for methodology and strategy and all the advisory stuff that I've done most of my career, but help us find and keep and retain the joy. It's just a pleasure to work on that.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you have to really condition people to start recognizing that self-care is not selfish. It really is, it's like a practice. It's something you need to do. If you are prioritizing self-care, then those around you, especially if you're a mom, you want your kids to recognize self-care as a priority, and you got to figure out how to treat yourself right to be able to do that. And so yourself as an entrepreneur, so you're juggling a different time zone, which has got to be difficult in itself with clients that are US based. And how do you prioritize self-care and joy and make sure you don't lose yourself in this entrepreneurial race? Can I say that?
It feels like a race. And the thing is, it's okay to be in a race. We have to treat it more like a marathon than a sprint inside of a marathon. And if it's a sprint, it needs to be a sprint. It's the sprint inside the marathon where we get in trouble, right? Because it's not sustainable. So for me, it's a very clear boundary on when I start and end my day. And I don't start my day typically before 8 a.m. Hawaii time. I did today, but Alison and Marcy will tell you, I wasn't totally with the program until we really just got into where we are now. The first 15 minutes, it was like, drink your coffee. And I had to get up way earlier just to get in a groove. And I know my sleeping circadian rhythm, and it's very important to have sleep. And I used to trade off sleep, and that is kryptonite for me. So know your kryptonite and know your superpower.
I think most people sleep is underrated when it should be the thing that we embrace the most. When we're off balance with sleep, there is no harmony because we're cranky, we're extra hungry, we feel like we don't have time, we're slower. Let's face it, when you're tired, you're slower.
It's funny, my 17-year-old said to me, time is an illusion. And I thought it was just another excuse for some of her weird behavior, but it really actually got me thinking, if time is an illusion, let's say that's a true statement. And for her, it clearly is, because her hours aren't like any hours we keep. However, she's so productive in her waking hours. It really got me thinking. And if time is an illusion and we have 168 hours in the week, we all know this from Laura Vanderkam's work. We know about sleep from Ariana Huffington's work. I mean, if we don't know it ourselves, there are plenty of people out there who are pretty popular who are telling us that we need to sleep, we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to think about time very differently. We're so productive in the time we spend, quote unquote, working, or the time we spend not working, right? Whether it's doing something fun for ourselves or our family or out in community, or maybe it's just cooking a meal, whatever it is, we're very, very productive in the time we spend. So why not also get performance enhanced by taking time to replenish? We charge our phones every night.
What a great visual. It is. We charge our phones. I've charged my Fitbit. I charge, you have everything. It starts to run out of power and you're like, oh, I got to find a plug. So, the plug for me is going to be equally important, that giving myself permission to have a comfy bed, have a comfy book, a nice book to read at night, to, follow my little routine. And I have a very strong nighttime routine. It starts with some flexibility training because I am not flexible, but I've been at it now for 8 months. It's August. I started in January. So I've been at it now for a long time, and it's made a huge difference in my ability, but also it's encouraged me to slow down a little bit, which is another thing. So I feel better in my body. Therefore I feel better in general, and I'm able to ease into the joy that I look for every day.
So speaking of easing into it, how has it been transitioning from what I would assume is a fast-paced city that you kind of had been living in to now Kauai? Like, what has been some of your biggest adjustments?
First and foremost, and I say this to everyone, if you're going to make a level one life change, do your best to not make more than one of those at one time. And of course, I never seem to take my own advice because, as you all know, as coaches, we teach what we most need to learn. That's just the way this works. Otherwise, we're not believable. We're not authentic. And so, if you're going to do a major move, it's really hard to also sell a house, buy a house, do a move, bring 5 dogs across to an island that doesn't really have rabies, have a husband who is in a union job, have to transition his job. And oh, by the way, just start a radio show. Just do that, So I would say I underestimated the transition time and impact to myself and my entire now blended Ohana family. So that was really a big transition, including these dogs. I mean, I'm shocked they're not barking. They'll probably start barking now. It's a lot to try to blend a family, including the furry ones. So I would say really try to limit the exposure on how many changes you make at one time, because the level one life changes are hard enough as it is.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's great advice. May I ask, and may I go back to your daughter? So I always feel that I coach a lot of women executives who are moms, and we love having conversations like, what are we learning from our children? And I think the sooner moms can recognize that their children are also there to as teachers, and it doesn't matter what age, but that we learn from them. You have different and deeper conversations with your kids. So you said one thing was her understanding of time and how that must have influenced your, a lot of the choices that you're making now with this move and everything. Can you just elaborate a little bit more, like things you might have learned from her, or even more about that time?
Sure. And my 21-year-old who's in San Diego. So she did not make the move. She was already out on her own for 3 years. Yet the impact on her of selling the quote unquote family homestead was significant. I did not anticipate that. I don't know that I would have been able to anticipate that. She didn't know the impact it would have on her. And so some of her concerns and her advice, I'll just be inside out and tell you, the first thing she said to me was, I seriously question your judgment, and I am very disappointed in you. I have it in a text, so I'm going to save that for her wedding someday, just to, give her a hard time. Yeah. And she really meant it, right? So at first, it's easy to get defensive and do she hasn't been on her own that long and she's hardly an adult and she can barely take care, right? That's the tape you run. However, when I really understood her feelings, she actually really felt like she had no more home base. Mm-hmm. So really reestablishing that with her in a different way. And then with my younger daughter, the time is illusion person, she is beyond her years and always has been. And in fact, she's a lot like me. She's the one giving advice. She's sort of the sage amongst her friends. And I hear myself in her. And so recognizing if you spot it, you probably got it. It's very hard to judge anything in anyone else that doesn't exist in ourselves, good or bad. And I use that as a coaching methodology or method as well.
That's awesome. And, it's interesting because when you, like what you were saying, like if you take something at face value, like their feelings, their hurt, their judgment, but you actually take a moment to kind of go deeper and you say, well, what actually are they saying? And then you can kind of work on something together. How do you do that with your clients? So I know you work with a lot of executives, you work with a lot of different people. And I think the most important, most powerful thing a coach can do is help people change their perspective to have a broader understanding. So then that way they can move forward. What techniques do you use for that?
One of the basics is borrowed from attorneys called Socratic questioning. It's the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And if you don't ask questions and really listen, not just hear, it's very hard to help someone break through. And my brand promise, if you will, has always been accelerating transformations. And not everyone is a good fit for me and vice versa in terms of coaching, because I'm going to push and I'm going to push really, really hard to help people get to the next level and the next level, which sometimes also means they're going to step back or slide back. It's sort of 1 step forward, no steps back, 10 steps forward, 9 steps back. I mean, it's a messy process. And so what I would say is being a very good listener, getting really into somebody's story. And then, like you said, Marcy, with my own daughter, and by the way, my husband, second and final, incredible stepdad, he's really taught me to listen more to the girls and to try to appreciate the feeling, the spirit in which the statement, which might come across as pretty ugly or dark, is really coming from a foundation of either hurt or pain or whatever's going on for them, and to step back and really try to understand the feeling behind it. And in a business context, I see this with executive teams all the time. What's the spirit in which this problem is happening? You know, most people are not coming at it to be a jerk. Some of them are, but mostly not.
Well, one of the great things I love about what you're saying is the idea of listening. But, you know, it's important to have that conversation, because what we see is not necessarily what is really going on. And I have a story. I moved as well. I uprooted my kids, and I watched my 8th grader, and I thought he just had the worst year of his life. And I was a horrible mother because I made him leave his home and his friends, and it was all my fault. And about 5 years later, I actually said, I am so sorry I made you move. I realized 8th grade was such a rough year for you. And he's like, what are you talking about? 8th grade was awesome. So what I saw without the conversation was something entirely different that he was experiencing. And I put my own thoughts on him that weren't there. And so it's that idea of actually having the conversation that is so valuable.
Yes. And for those of you with teenagers that are not always open to it. So that's where coaching for me, especially in a business context, is way simpler and easier because teenage girls aren't always open to talking to their mom, especially a coach mom. You know, they'll say things like turn off the coaching. However, they do have what I call the poker tell. And so they will reveal things that are actually happening for them, to your point, Alison, below the surface. I just have to be very observant, and to your whole point, not put my own stuff on it. And that's difficult, especially when you come from a place of deep caring.
Yeah, it was amazing to me. It was so telling. This same child. So this same child is now off on his own. He's got a budding career. He's graduated from college, which is all very exciting. And I'm going to credit my dad for telling me, you know, he's wired differently than you are. And I have to take that into consideration because, again, I transpose my own thoughts and feelings, my own emotions onto somebody else, thinking, of course, they're just like me, but they aren't. And then taking them as an individual, and that they can do their own things, and they have their own thoughts, their own feeling, their own direction of where they want to go. Is, you know, that's where the children, again, are teaching us. So Marcy, to your point, children really are educators in so many different ways.
So I love that. I have a question from somebody that chatted me. So they were asking, and they saw on your blog that you have a lot of blogs around setting personal boundaries. So it sounds like she's struggling with setting some personal boundaries. Any advice as it relates to feeling you just have too much on your plate, and how do you set some boundaries?
Yeah, it's hard to say no. So I actually have a course where I have women in particular practice saying no. So let's do it now. Would you do it with me,
No.
ladies?
No. How'd I do?
Okay.
Yes, I would love to. I'd love to do it now.
Next question. Okay, so it's 3 kinds of no's. I'm not going to tell you which we're going to do. We're just going to do it. And it's interesting. We did this once on a big event. We had, I think, 100 women, and we left the sound on. So in Zoom or whatever, you know, methodology or medium you're using, you'll hear a delay. So we could almost hear the symphony of 100 no's. It was really cool. So here we go. No.
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 Okay. Now you're going to do it like this. No.
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 Now like this. No.
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 Which one was the most comfortable?
No.
The first one.
So for Alison, the first one, for Marcy, the second one. Many women will tell you the second one is the question mark, and it's the most comfortable. Our no's are just too soft. The first one, Alison, is where I'm at. I'm still not good at the no. Really firm, really clear. And that's boundaries, where you set a guardrail for yourself. I'm not working before 8 a.m. Hawaii time most days. My assistant knows, just don't schedule it. And if you're going to, we have to have a conversation. It's going to be less than 10% of my time in the year, because I'm not good before that hour. It's the witching hour, and no one likes me without coffee. Ask my family. And for things like the friendship facet of life, we have a really hard time saying no when we feel needed, or we're caretaking, or we're in a toxic relationship. We need to say no to spending time on things where we really mean no, and we say yes when we mean no.
Good lesson. I like that.
Me too.
When you're able to feel the difference, even though it's just the same word said three different ways, you really do feel that connection to what you mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So mine with a no, it's funny because you said it, I could understand as soon as you started, because it was just instinctual. Like it was a question. I had no idea where you're coming. And then I completely understand what you're saying. Like, it's like not a confident no. It's kind of a maybe, it's a different word than no.
It leaves you an out, Marcy. And that's the thing about those of us, again, men and women, that have a hard time saying no, coming from a good place of our heart. It's not to say, have a jaded heart. You heard it first on Revel Coach. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we really need to get more clear, and knowing what you want and knowing what you don't want and knowing what your guardrails are and where the line in the sand is part of creating harmony, because otherwise you're not going to get out of the balance cycle, and it typically leads to burnout because something has to give.
Yeah. Well, it's like creating that to-don't list. So if you have your to-dos, which gets way too long, and then you do your to-don'ts, and if there's not anything really on there, then you have to really question, what can you move over, and looking at that.
I haven't heard that before. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. To don't or not to don't. That is the question.
That is the question. Oh, well, Dana, this has been so great talking to you. I could talk to you forever. I really appreciate, just your focus of what you do and your clarity of how you get there and everything. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you or get a copy of your book, can you just share a little bit more about, where they can reach out to you and get to know more of your work?
Sure. The book's on Amazon. You can check out my website, settlesmarter.com. We're already smart. We just need to get smarter. And all of my social, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram is at Settle Smarter.
Well, Dana, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm going to agree with you. Harmony beats balance every time. And it's definitely something I'm going to be making sure I add a little bit of those micro joys into my day. I think maybe once an hour, I should just set a timer and be like, all right, I'm going to spend the next 30 seconds finding joy.
Beautiful. Have a dance party with yourself.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Just like dance parties. She's a good dancer.
That's right. That's right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on It's Better Together with Revel Coach. We will see you next time.